This is Gender in Focus. I'm Elle, and each week I sit down with the president of Transfocus Consulting and all-round gender diversity genius, Kai Scott. I get to ask all the questions you've ever wanted to ask about how to make the workplace and the world a better place for trans and non-binary people. Let's get into it.
It's Pride season, and most people think of it as a time of parades, parties, and rainbow everything. But behind the glitter is a deeper story. Where did Pride actually come from? Who is it really for today? And why do some people in the 2S LGBTQIA community feel more disconnected than ever from Pride? In this episode, we dig into the history without the lecture, explore how corporate campaigns both lift up and sometimes let down our communities, and talk frankly about what Pride means for trans and non-binary people, especially in 2025. We'll also ask, are allies truly showing up or just showing off? What gets overlooked, and how can we make Pride not just a moment of celebration, but a launch pad for lasting change? And I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Elle. How are you doing?
Doing very well, thank you. How are you?
Excellent. Really excited to talk about this topic.
You just said that most people think of Pride as a sort of rainbow engulfed party. But that's certainly, it's not always been that way, and that isn't it. Like, Pride represents so much more than that. So could you explain that?
Yeah, it's such a good point that, the way that it's represented in media or on the news, I can understand why people go to that first. And certainly it's not bad to celebrate or have a good time, and especially in the summertime, it's fun to get out. But it had a different type of origin, which I think is important to remember and I think to connect with when we're thinking about this time. So it started in Stonewall. It's a Stonewall Inn in New York City, and it had been continuously raided by police. This is back in the late 1960s, and basically it came to a head. People had enough of being harassed. At that time, it was illegal to be 2S LGBTQIA. You could be fired for being found to be part of the community, and the police were actively revealing people to be a part of the community and harassing them when they were just trying to gather and be themselves in a place that accepted them for who they are. And so people had enough. It bubbled up and over on the night of June 29th, or at the end of June 1969. And basically they fought back and just like, that's it, no more. We're done hiding. We're done taking this type of heat, facing violence, etc. And really, it was a tipping point for our community to essentially, it began with a protest, right? And people asserting that they ought to have a place in this world. And of course, much more happened past that. It was just a starting point. And so much has happened since then. But essentially, it was now people wanted to find their place within society rather than kind of hiding out in the corners. And so it was started. It's really important to acknowledge that particularly trans women of color or gender nonconforming folks were an essential part of that tipping point of pushing back. There's a bit of debate about, who threw the first stone and things like that. I think it's important just to stay focused on the fact that it was a protest, it was a pushback, and there were many facets of the community that came together to make that possible.
Mm-hmm. When we look at kind of the evolution of Pride then, and you've, explained that so perfectly, that it was pushback and it was violent and it was against the violence against our community. Whereas now it's really that it's come a very long way and a lot has changed. So how has that journey looked along the, not that you're like the spokesperson of all LGBT people,
No.
but how has that evolution come to be?
Yeah, so there's been many stages since 1969. Of course, there's much that happened. Next it was the AIDS epidemic, and it kind of ravaged and harmed the community in unspeakable ways. And we had to do that alone for the most part. There were some
Yeah.
very important allies along the way, but certainly government didn't step in to help. But yet, the community continued to organize and to ask for things, to demand for things, to say, we are people just like everybody else. We deserve rights. Anti-discrimination laws, wanting the freedom to marry who they love, right? If they're
Hmm.
in same gender relationships. So that was a big, battle that took many years. And, in some places is still, depending on where in the world one is, it's still not an afforded right. And adoption was another big one. To us LGBTQIA folks in the military, you name it. Having the rights were an important part of that. But it took kind of every step of the way, and continue to do that every
Hmm.
step of the way, to have those hard fought rights that are established in law and supported by the government. And by society more generally as well. But certainly getting together and celebrating or highlighting the issues is an important part. Along the way, it picked up steam, I would say, and corporations started to take an interest in attending these annual events, especially as it was destigmatized in society to be 2S LGBTQIA, and they wanted to be helpful and supportive, and were wanting to show up. And for the initial ones, that was actually pretty big for them to
Hmm.
show up. I mean, we don't want to necessarily point out individual organizations, but there were some early arrivers in the 1990s that was pretty gutsy, right? And so I
Hmm.
think it started from a good place, where corporations were showing up, and putting policies in place to support that. It wasn't just showing up at Pride, but they were
Right.
reflecting that. So having a same gender partner benefits, that for a
Hmm.
long time was not a thing. It's just
Hmm.
wild to me for now,
Yeah.
to think about that. But there were some early adopters of that, or early organizations that said, no, this is important, and we are going to put this in place because we know we have 2S LGBTQIA employees, and we want to support them, right? But
Hmm.
of course, it shifted to be more corporate, in terms of big dollars involved. It was more about advertising. For some, it still is. Like
Hmm.
it's a big platform. If you think about Vancouver Pride as an example, it's 750,000 people show up. You put your logo out there. Yes, you're supporting a cause, but you're also getting some exposure to folks.
Hmm.
So it kind of shifted along the way.
When we think of those early adopters, we really are looking at people who, despite what people were thinking, or what was the, I don't want to say the norm or
Mm,
the everyday belief about LGBTQ people, but there was certainly a lot of negative opinions around the queer community as a whole.
mm,
Now we're kind of not exactly back in that
mm,
place. We're kind of at a place where, especially trans rights, are being pushed back, and we're seeing a lot of corporations that were formerly very happy
mm,
to wave their rainbow banner suddenly
mm.
disappearing, and it's sort of leaving a bit of a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths now, when we're seeing that play out.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, it literally feels like an abandonment, or a
Hmm.
betrayal, to many, because it's like, okay, you're able to be with us in the good times, but as soon as it gets tough or difficult, then some are gone. I want to say not
Hmm.
all. That's really important,
Hmm.
but certainly it is noticed that people who are quietly or not so quietly leaving, that's when it's needed the most, right?
Right.
When there
Yeah.
is perhaps a cost.
Hmm.
And I don't think it's a huge cost, right? Because especially kind of sexual diversity is better understood,
Yeah, for sure.
and across society, or at least known.
Hmm.
There is pushback, But I think it's really important to note that that kind of leaving is really it just echoes so much of what we've already experienced.
Right.
And
Yeah.
certainly people who are older than us could have lived that, right?
Yeah.
And felt that. And then now we see that almost, it's not the same, you're right, but it can feel a little bit cyclical where it's like,
Hmm.
oh, okay, we're back to, something where we're struggling for people to understand and to know that we need others to support us, right?
Hmm. Yeah, it's a bit of an uncomfortable familiarity, I
Mm.
guess.
Hmm.
Although not the same. It feels very familiar.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about that on a kind of wider scale. So a lot of people, to us LGBTQIA people, are feeling really disconnected from Pride, especially this year, or especially sort of more recent years. And yeah, I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yes. So many go to Pride and really enjoy that moment. It's a way to experience community. Perhaps, you don't see everybody day to day. And so this is that one time where you kind of see everybody in the street and hugs and, dancing and
Hmm.
whatnot. Art, a lot of art, music, choral activities. It's very beautiful for many, right? Or even allies who come and are witness to it, or also joining in that celebration,
Hmm.
becoming aware of the issues and whatnot. But for many, myself included, I will be honest, I can feel exhausted,
Hmm.
and many others feel exhausted. I would say, particularly trans and non binary folks, I would say I can imagine, especially down in the United States, that there's just a huge risk to
Hmm.
going to Pride as well. You don't know who's going to show up and counter protest. Now, there's always a bit of a contingent of counter protest in any Pride parade. It's never zero counter protest, right?
Hmm.
But the degree and the kind of the vibe of it could be more hostile,
Yeah.
or I've heard that, I've read that, and talking to folks, and certainly folks who live in Russia or Eastern Europe are very familiar with the types of violence that can happen when queer and trans folks gather. So there's just that kind of edge that appears now to what was otherwise a celebration. And I can appreciate why people are just not wanting to go for safety
Hmm.
reasons, or exhaustion, just like constantly thinking and talking and worrying about these issues. You just maybe not have the bandwidth to go to yet another thing where
Hmm.
those are forefronted. So for myself, I escape. Like I go to, we have had another episode where I talked about all the backpacking that I do to regenerate, to regroup, and everybody has their way of recalibrating.
Hmm.
But for some, they just don't feel that. Also, others don't connect with pride. Not speaking of my experience, but other people, especially people with intersectional experiences, the corporate focus is doesn't feel so community oriented anymore.
Yeah.
Feels more like making money because,
Hmm.
of course, people who put on pride parades understandably need money to pull
Absolutely.
off. It's huge, like
Hmm.
security and organizing, and you know, uh, it's just booths. You name it, I get it, but it's no longer. It's a lot of corporations and then maybe a few 2S LGBTQI communities sprinkled throughout, right? And so you can't really see as much of one's community in that. And then on top of that, I would also add is the presence of police that
Hmm.
often are at pride parades. Everybody handles it a little bit differently, but I can appreciate for especially people of color, specifically Black, queer and trans folks, that understandably puts them on edge. There's
Absolutely.
not a lot of clarity as to how police presence can create that safety for them. And so that's another aspect that really has caused concern. And
Hmm.
this was well before. this time, but
Yeah.
has kind of persisted into this time. So there's a lot going on in Pride that is important to know about and to
Mhm.
understand and be sensitive towards.
I think that would really surprise a lot of people because I imagine, or the impression I get from a lot of cis straight people is that there is just an assumption that everybody loves Pride. Like Pride is our time.
Yes. Yeah. Why aren't you going to Pride?
Yeah, what are you
What's
doing?
wrong with you?
Although to be fair, I did do that to you.
True. True. Uh,
Well, I think like what you said about the parades is just like I do. Well, okay, I haven't been to Pride for about 7 years, but
okay.
I generally, from what I remember, I do really like Pride, but not the parades. I
Mm,
really don't love, and for that reason, it's just it feels very corporate and that I appreciate what you're saying that it's really important and it is really important because
mm,
it's a really expensive affair
sure.
to get together.
Uh,
But one of the best parades I've ever been to was just before I moved to Canada,
mm,
and it was in the neighboring
mm.
village to mine, and
Aw.
it was this tiny it was tiny little parade,
Yeah.
and there was no corporate
Mm.
sponsors at all, and it was just the local community, and that was the most special thing I think I've
Wow.
ever seen. Like I really felt like very proud
Yeah.
actually of it, and that for me was like, oh, this is what it's about. Like it's about, especially in an environment like that where
Mm.
it's not very diverse, and it's maybe it's getting better, but it's not a big kind of focus on diversity there.
Right.
And so to see like, oh no, like we're here, people exist that are queer in this
Mm.
space, and like that was a really special thing. But generally speaking, the parades don't speak to me that much
Mm.
because of that environment. It just feels a bit ugh.
Yeah.
Or like it's that's not really what it's about, I guess, in my
No.
mind.
No. And I'm glad you pointed out. That's so beautiful and touching. I love that. And I can just imagine it too. It's small, it's intimate, it's
Mm,
people coming out to support each other. And it's good to note that diversity because oftentimes, especially in the media, it's like the big urban,
yeah.
affairs. And I think it is really important to distinguish there's diversity among parades or
Hmm.
gatherings, marches. There's different flavors,
Hmm.
especially when you contrast that to say suburban or even rural settings,
Hmm.
where that's so critical
Yeah.
that people be able to come together and for the community to show support.
Hmm.
That can make a huge difference for people to have a sense of belonging or safety. So I think that, and it's, as you mentioned, usually less corporate,
Yes.
or not corporate at
No,
all.
no.
Now that you mentioned it, it jogged my memory. I did attend the Squamish Nation put on a parade, and it was super touching. It was at their or it started and ended at their longhouse,
Hmm.
which is like a cultural centerpiece of their nation. But it was just really beautiful. People together as a community. Walking around. They had special consideration for elders, which I thought was really touching.
Mm.
They had a bit of a float with their logo and branding on it, and all very glittery and rainbowy. And then, but the reason why I'm chuckling is sometimes the truck would go a little too fast for the people walking, and so it you know, but that to me is so beautiful, right? Because
Yeah.
it's like because sometimes the big pride parades can be a bit polished, and of course
Hmm.
they need to be, right? Because it's a bigger
Of course.
audience. But I think there's something so touching that it's just like kind of people coming together, and it's maybe a bit like all over the place, but that in of
Hmm.
itself makes it wonderful. So I don't know. I just really enjoyed that
Hmm.
one. Often there's a focus on the kind of general pride parade, but in many, especially urban centers, there can also be additional marches. So
Hmm.
I think some people are familiar with the Dyke March as an example, but in Vancouver we also have the Trans March, and I
Mm.
think that's really helpful or there's the East Van parade. So there's all these different pockets that are perhaps sub communities or different aspects of the larger community that are focusing in on specific aspects. So
Mhm.
Transmarch becomes really a focal point on the remaining issues for greater inclusion of gender diversity and just highlighting stuff that's going on and also coming together. But it's a
Mhm.
little bit less celebratory, a little bit more like parade versus march language
Yeah.
tells you what's going on. The wider public is invited to that. I mean, you would want to check for your city, but I know in Vancouver they are.
I actually wanted to ask you that on a sort of wider scale about allies and pride, and are allies welcome in pride?
Yeah, I think oftentimes allies wonder whether they should show up. They want to support, but aren't,
Hmm.
like they want to give space if that's more appropriate. Of course, it depends on what kind of pride we're talking about.
Hmm.
Certainly, maybe in smaller communities, it is a little bit more focused. Obviously, read, what's provided online, but generally, uh, allies are welcome and even invited to come as a way of
Hmm.
showing support. And I know many organizations or corporations, besides putting together a float, they do organize their employees to show up, whether they're part of the community themselves or just supportive allies. Generally, the folks that show up are folks that have somebody to us LGBTQIA in their you know
Hmm.
world, whether it's family or friends or whatnot.
Yeah.
But of course, if you don't have a connection point, still come. It is a lot of fun. um, I've marched in many a pride parade, and I think allies are a bit surprised because yes, there are many struggles, but they're also a little bit surprised by how much joy there is as well, how much kind of freedom and expression and just kind of creativity as well,
Hmm.
right? So that is something that's welcome. I think it's really important to recognize how one shows up at Pride, and this wouldn't just be Pride; this would be any 2S LGBTQIA event as an ally. To recognize that one is a visitor, and as
Yeah.
a visitor, there's a posture that you bring to it. You can be curious, but not invasive. You can, you know, find ways of providing support, right? If you see somebody like an elderly person, struggling, help them out, right? Things like that.
Hmm.
It's just a very small example, but just be there ready to, rather than taking, I think it is about giving.
Hmm.
As best you can, and maybe even doing a little prep work and like reading about what it is and why it is and whatnot. So I think that helps to showing up. And of course, I do that whenever I show up, say, in a space that I am not a part of, right? Any Indigenous community I'm going into, I'm trying to understand better before I arrive, to show up as best as I can. Also, and this is probably more relevant in, say, party settings, what can happen sometimes is allies show up en masse, and then the 2S LGBTQI portion becomes a minority in the space that was created for them to be the majority.
Yeah.
And so that's another thing to think about is like, yes, showing up, maybe you bring a friend, but maybe you're not coming with 10 folks.
Hmm.
I think it's a little different in the Pride Parade situation because there's so many people. But when there's a cap on things, just reflecting on how many of allies you bring, um,
Hmm.
especially in relative to the other people in the space.
Hmm. For sure. What would you say, speaking of allies, that there are kind of misconceptions that allies bring to the season of
Mhm.
Pride? What would you say that looks like?
Oh, where do we begin? So many allies have a preconceived notion of what pride is, and it's
Hmm.
like one thing, or it's like this. All prides are this way. Um, I do think it's about a lot of partying, and sure, there are parties involved.
Hmm.
They think it's over sexualized. That's another
Hmm.
very common misconception, and it's not to say that it's like free of any reference to sex. But sex is such a small part of the bigger picture that I think people overemphasize that aspect or pay too much attention to that aspect.
Hmm.
Um, and it's not to say sex is bad. Obviously, it's wonderful, but it's just like it's relative to everything else going on. It's not the focal point, and because there's a wider discomfort with sex that can often kind of be the focus for a lot
Mhm.
of cis allies. Is like, oh, why do you got to do it that way, you know? And it's like, well,
Yeah.
it's a celebration of many things. Let's just say
Mhm.
that. But that's not the only thing going on. Another common misconception is that it's only for adults. And
Yeah.
certainly, I would say certain aspects are, right? The evening time stuff, probably not going to bring your kid to that, right? So,
Right.
but
Sure.
there's tons of family based events that are geared towards families with kids, and it's really powerful for kids to understand that there's a diversity of people, come on all shapes and sizes, and so that's a really beautiful and wonderful way to participate, if you do have kids in your life, right? No
Mhm.
matter if it's your, you know, your own kids or just kids you're being a part of their lives. So yeah, so it's one other thing. There's many more, but I'm for whatever reason blanking. Do you have any that come to the top of your mind?
Only that, yeah, it's like a constant party, and also some of us don't like parties.
Right.
So there
Yeah.
are other events too. It's more about sort of centering queer people in doing anything. There could be like, I don't know, meetups at a restaurant, or there could be there was like ice skating, LGBTQIA ice skating, or
Mm,
swimming, or like there are just events going on. But it's more about centering queer people
mm,
when we're not centered for most of the time. So
right.
it's an opportunity to be centered, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
Uh,
And to enjoy each other's company while doing a shared
Right.
fun activity, right?
Mhm.
That you could do throughout the year, but there's something special about kind of concentrating that, especially in the
It's like
summer
a
months.
dedicated,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
dedicated time to make sure that, because like, and that's the thing, we should be doing that all year round, really. Like,
Mm,
and that's actually something I wanted to talk to you about, was the whole Pride season exists, and therefore we don't need to think about it for 11 months of the year, or the rest of the year.
mm.
And that can show up quite a lot, right? Especially in corporate spaces.
Oh yeah. 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 It's interesting. The positive side of that is that it's a easy anchoring point, right?
Hmm.
So it's like, okay, we'll kind of galvanize this moment to tie in all kinds of things. Maybe they do their own stuff in the corporate, and then they organize to have employees go to the Pride Parade. Cool, like I get it. It's helpful, right? Because there's
Mm.
so many other things happening, but it's nice to have like these pockets where you're doing concentrated efforts. However, then it becomes this like special moment rather than how do you weave it into the everyday, because
Hmm.
the meaningful experience is the everyday for anyone, no matter the
Hmm.
topic, right?
100%. Yeah.
So how do we translate that from the big fun kind of focal spotlights to how do we be with each other in a good way, whether we're talking about queer or trans issues, and for people to be aware of what the issues are, to be able to take meaningful action when a moment asks or invites that. So that's the real piece, and unfortunately,
Mhm.
the positive aspect of the anchoring point becomes also the negative part of just, okay, phew, we got that done, and now we're on to the next thing, and then every
Mhm.
group kind of gets this little chunk, uh, which I think is important. I don't want to discount that and say that it shouldn't happen, but it's more that can we think about it a little bit beyond that to have it be meaningful. And sometimes the everyday is not as splashy or sexy, right?
Sure.
Because it's just like these smaller moments where we're showing up for each other, but those are the ones that, when we do all the survey and research, those are the ones that really touch people's hearts, right?
Mhm.
So I think
Yeah.
that's worth investing in as well, as a corporation, as an individual, whoever one might be.
Mhm. That Pride season is about spotlighting things that should be going on
Mm,
throughout the year. Or I don't know. It to me, it's always felt like, I'm going to believe you a lot more if your allyship shows up in
mm, mm,
February, uh, than just showing up in June, July,
yeah.
August.
Uh,
If anything, I would prefer it to show up in February. If you didn't do much in June, uh, I still would prefer
huh.
that.
Yeah, that is interesting.
February just being a random
Yeah,
month,
yeah, yeah.
by the
Not
way.
like another special.
Nothing's happening in February.
They're
Yeah.
like, oh no, another thing we're missing.
Yeah,
Huh.
like, oh my gosh.
And there are opportunities too, right? There are other kind of,
Mhm.
International Day Against Homophobia and Biphobia in May 17th. There's
Mhm.
Trans Day of Visibility, March 31st. There's Trans Day of Remembrance in November, right? So there's um, International Lesbian Day, International Non-Binary Day. So International Two-Spirit Day, which started this year. So there's still opportunities throughout. But again, if it's only on those days, then unfortunately it feels a bit shallow.
Mhm. Yeah. I wanted to kind of extend that a bit more because at the moment we are, like we've talked about earlier, that there's a lot that's gone on in the last year or so, and it's kind of
Mm,
been building over a few years. There's been a lot of, especially anti-trans
mm,
backlash. That kind of feeds into a lot of why people are feeling a bit disconnected from Pride, or queer people are feeling disconnected from Pride this year. And I was wondering if you could speak to what's going on with Pride this year and why there is it matters, but it's also there's a lot of pullback from the community at the same
mhm.
time.
Yeah, it is. It's a big moment where there's been a lot in the media, in the news about trans and non-binary, whether laws are changing or attempts to implement anti-trans pieces, on so many different topics. It's not just one thing, right? With marriage, it was just
Mhm.
marriage. Not to say that it's big. I mean, I'm not discounting it, but
Mhm.
on trans, it's access to healthcare, it's access to sport, it's how they're going to be treated in schools, it's washrooms. It's like, holy crap, right? It's just
Mhm.
nonstop. Really, literally any day, I'm looking at the news to say, okay, what's happened? And overnight,
Yeah.
something has happened. So many
Mhm.
fronts to be paying attention to. I would say even more so for folks in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this year, World Pride is happening in Washington, D.C. So that's like a really tough moment. And not everybody feels safe, especially trans and non binary folks, to travel into the United States from abroad. Like, for some, they make the decision. Obviously, everybody can make their own risk assessment. There's more or
Mhm.
less risk depending on one's, setup, or privilege or lack thereof. But still, it's
Mhm.
just like, and even where things are located in DC are difficult to establish because funding is being withdrawn from all these locations. So
Right.
it's just like you never feel like you can kind of step on solid ground. Um, and so I think many in the community, and I see this in conversations with folks, and I see them on social media posts and whatnot, and just reports that are being generated. Just like people are pulling back for
Mhm.
understandable safety reasons. And that's where I think allies do play a role, not just
Yeah.
during the pride parades or pride gatherings, but to show up when these types of legislations are being introduced, or to be aware that they're being introduced, to talk to folks in their own communities, to show up in protests when they happen. I'm writing pretty constant letters to, I'm a US citizen, so I, I'm more politically involved than I have been in the past, to
Mhm.
write letters to senators, congress people, you name it. Pay attention. I nerd out to the degree where I even go into their like C-SPAN, read, Supreme Court cases, and you know,
Mhm.
donating to Lambda Legal. Just like
Mhm.
really focused. Because I think if allies at least are aware of what's going on, then they can take the action that makes sense to them, or is suitable for their situation. So that's
Mhm.
what I would say is really important part of this year's Pride Parade, or not Pride Parade, but just Pride generally.
Mhm. We've talked a lot about the kind of struggles of the community kind of going on at the moment and in the past, but what about the sort of wins and the positives that are going on this Pride
Mm-hmm.
season?
Yeah, it's really important not to lose sight of that because it can feel pretty
Mhm.
grim, and it is. Uh,
Yes.
but there is also a lot of really important pushback happening, and United States is one area, but also I would say in Canada. with the things that are shaping up, and wanting to be a
Mhm.
contrast point to what is happening down in the United States. People are galvanizing and saying, no, we're not like that. We
Mhm.
want to be on the side of inclusion, and we value diversity and whatnot more generally, but also specific to trans and non binary folks. Um, but in the United States, I would say that community members, along with allies, are showing up, saying no to different types of legislation, whether through writing or whatever protests happen, and it's landing, right. So whether it's,
Mhm.
I'm trying to remember if it was Montana, who they were going to introduce some sort of washroom bill, like not banning trans people from washrooms, essentially, including two trans and non-binary Congress people in their midst, right? Like they didn't even. This wasn't just like hypothetical. Like they had trans people in their
Right.
midst, and they were voting again. Like it just blows my mind sometimes. But they were able
Mhm.
to, and it's sad that you have to have trans people to, break this down for them,
Yes,
because that takes a
for
lot of
sure.
emotional labor. These two representatives, they broke it down, and their Congress voted against it, by thin margins. A little uncomfortable for me, but I'm just glad it didn't pass.
Sure.
Right. So
Yeah.
that's an instance in where people, once they kind of have a deeper understanding of what this actually translates into, they can shift away from that thinking, which is
Mhm.
encouraging. I would also say that I'm encouraged by various churches or denominations showing up, that and other religious faith-based organizations, communities, that there, of course, there's a lot of harm. I want to recognize that, but
Mhm.
there's also a lot of they're justice oriented, and recognizing
Mhm.
when people are marginalized, whether it's on issues of immigration or race, or racism, and trans being one of those aspects. They come and are like, no, and they have a
Mhm.
certain amount of weight, which I find very encouraging. So just a few examples.
Mhm.
There's many, many more, I'm sure, uh, but where
Mhm.
things, there's the kind of backlash, but then there's the response to that backlash, which is changing things.
I think it's so easy to lose hope at the moment. Like I certainly, especially with the work that we do at Transfocus, and I don't know, I read a lot of stuff. I will have occasional wobbles of being like, oh my gosh, everything is terrible, and it is. It sucks. There's a lot of really negative stuff going on, but the positives are really
Mm,
helpful in kind of reminding you that there is progress still, and that there
mm,
is hope still. It's not just all negative. And we do weekly like good news on
mm.
social media, on the Transfocus social media page. And that helps because I do the research for that. So I get to find all the good stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's very helpful. Yeah, it's a good reminder that there are some good things going on too, and that as much as we have a lot of people pushing against, and there's a lot of backlash, there's a lot of people also
Mm.
recognizing that that's not the way we want to move forward.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they're showing up in very powerful and strong ways. And I'm so excited and thankful for that. That's really critical.
Mhm. I also think that that's probably where this differs from the sort of cyclical nature
Mm,
of it, is that I would say that we have more support and more allies now than we ever did.
mm,
And so while there is all this backlash, sort of, especially government pushback,
mm,
we have a lot of allies. And
mm.
that's very special. That's something that I think previous generations didn't have as much of.
Right. Yeah, they actually know what trans means to some degree. Not
Brilliant. Yeah.
everybody, but certainly a lot of people now.
Hmm.
It's on their radar, and they see what's happening, and they're like, "That's not right. That's not how
Hmm.
I. That's not like a country I want to live in." So,
Right.
and
Yeah.
they're then galvanized to help out in some way. And of course, for
Hmm.
everybody, that's different. But yeah, you're right. There is a lot more, and certainly what happened with queer people, I think is really important, having gone kind of ahead, and there's a bit of a path paving, although there are distinctions between
Yeah.
kind of sexual diversity and gender diversity. But I think people realize, hey, we didn't treat lesbian, gay, bisexual, and other sexually diverse folks that well, and
Hmm.
now it's okay, somewhat okay. how about we not do that whole thing again and just
Right.
accept trans folks, you know? So,
Mhm. There was a study that was done recently that showed that I can't remember the percentages. So this is a really, you're the stats
okay,
person,
right.
really. I feel nervous even talking about
I
this.
love that you're giving
Maybe,
stats though.
yeah,
Bravo.
maybe you know the study. Maybe you know the study that showed that the majority of Canadians believe that accepting trans people it represents.
Mm.
Do you know what it is?
Yeah, yeah.
You're not. You tell the story,
Oh
please.
no, well, I don't have the specific stat, but I think it is like upwards of 75%
Mhm.
or more of Canadians think that supporting trans and non-binary folks is a form of progress. Like they're in
That's
support
it.
of that type of progress, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
that's key. Yeah.
So it's sort of nerve wracking that trans folks are on the radar a lot more than they were. But also, because of that, while the radar brings backlash, it also brings a lot more understanding and a lot more allyship.
Mm-hmm.
So to end, can I get you to talk about how people can make Pride season not just about a celebration, how they can use this season to really bring change in their communities or their workplaces or families or whatever
Mm-hmm.
it is.
That's a great question. As I kind of get into kind of actionable items, and
Mhm.
there's so much that can be done, like showing up at some of these more subtle events that we were talking about before, if they're open to the general public. But I know that, say, things like libraries or even community organizations tend to put on pride
Mhm.
events, especially in bigger cities. So looking at what they have on there, somebody talking about their life or showcasing their book or their art or whatnot. Another thing I would encourage, and of course not every city will have this, but there's usually more like arts, like plays, even art displays of queer and trans people, and that can often give like a really beautiful and nuanced and diverse view into the communities, and kind of how they're representing themselves. And it generates dialogue among yourself and whoever else is coming with you. You can join, usually they have maybe like little talks at the art. So you could talk to the artists, and that generates dialogue. So anything that kind of generates dialogue that's more engaging than just kind of passively consuming pride is, I think, really critical. But there might be folks who are listening who are a little bit more active. And so I'd be remiss. I used to be a part of the Vancouver Frontrunners, and they have Frontrunners has chapters everywhere. It's queer and trans running group, and there's pride runs, right? So this is again kind of outside of the main parade party focus, and focused on coming together and doing something active. And you don't have to be a runner, you can walk it. It's getting outside, it's touching grass, and we had like disco stations so you can stop and dance, drag queens all along the route. For those who are a bit more race oriented, which I used to be, not anymore. With Vancouver Pride Run, we had a third race category for non-binary folks, right? So it just like you really get to experience, and of course, allies are invited. It's a way to also financially support
Mhm.
an organization. So donations, I think, are always welcome, because right now, especially in the United States, particularly, a lot of funding is being pulled, right?
Mhm.
From especially to us LGBTQI groups. So having allies support them financially, always a good thing. Of course, not the only thing, but an important one. I could go on, but those are just a few ideas. I don't know if you have any recommendations, Elle, for things that allies could do to support the community.
No, only just to. I really liked what you said earlier, and that's something I would want to end on is that you're there as an ally. You can enjoy it and you can be entertained. Of course, that's like a big part of it, but also that it's your opportunity to show up for the community as well, and you can. I don't want to say serve the community, but you can. There are definitely things you can do to help the community,
Yeah.
especially right now. There's a lot going on that is really needed. So, yeah, use your allyship to do something as well as enjoy Pride.
And to that point, just to underscore that, I would say volunteer is like
Mhm.
all of these events, they don't just happen. They actually take a lot of person power. And so
Yes.
just saying, hey, I usually, on websites, they're calling for volunteers. So just apply and show up.
Mhm.
And that actually is a powerful way to learn. I do so much learning by serving, by
Mhm. For sure.
volunteering. And then I just have so much of a richer understanding, not because I'm, pummeling somebody with direct questions. I'm just absorbing through
Mhm.
observation. And then I can share that with others who say, maybe they say something kind of wild about the community. You're like, I did not experience that. This is what I
Mhm.
experienced when I showed up.
Mhm.
People were laughing, they were hugging each other, because, maybe you need to counterbalance some of those misconceptions.
Yeah,
And
completely.
then you've got real on the ground information to convey to folks who probably have not encountered either a person themselves or the community in general.
Mhm. Can I get you to talk about just very briefly the Pride sessions that we have going on at Transfocus at the
Ah,
moment?
yes, yes. So we can come in to your organization to provide a Pride session. It's usually hour and a half, where basically we go over what Pride is and what it's not, and kind of nuance it a bit of the history, how things have evolved, and then just really focusing on how to show up and support the community in everyday instances. So it's kind of translating the one time a year focus into every day. So it's
Mhm.
real practical, tangible, supportive, joyful, and also a learning experience for those. And sometimes, depending on the organization, we can also send out a survey in advance, an anonymous one, and solicit the stories from 2S LGBTQIA folks and or their loved ones who can share stories of empowerment or struggle or whatnot, just to illustrate some of those themes. So it's not just me talking; it's also from the organization itself. So,
And
um,
people find that really powerful, right?
oh,
When you've done that.
it blows their mind sometimes.
Mhm.
One, sometimes people don't realize that they have two LGBTQIA
Right?
folks. Maybe a bit surprised, but
Mhm.
also don't realize that beyond just the people themselves as part of the community, there's actually a bunch of loved ones who are
Mhm.
like super concerned and or also supportive and being fantastic allies, so they could really learn from those folks as well. And it just really fills out the picture in a very beautiful way, and it's
Mhm.
not something from the outside, it's coming from the inside.
Amazing. We do have some posts coming on social media all about Pride and ways you can show up as an ally. So where can everyone find you on social media, Claire?
Ah, yes, social media. So we've got LinkedIn, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, YouTube, Blue Sky, Facebook. If you follow us on any one of these or multiple, you'll essentially get kind of weekly tips and tools and thoughtful reflection questions, a whole variety of different things,
Mhm.
little videos. So it's really hopefully engaging and useful for all the allies out there.
Amazing. Great. Thank you so much. See you
Yeah,
next week.
thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
See you later.